what we're now going to look at is creating to-dos. So this is a family to-do solution. So the next thing to look at is how do we actually introduce a database of to-dos and add to that database from the app. So again, the first thing to do before worrying about how it looks or anything like that is to go into our database and create that table. So what we're going to do is add in a new table, and this is going to be called to-dos. Okay, and we are going to introduce Glide's row ID. It's a basic column called row ID. I highly recommend that whenever you introduce a table of information, you use a row ID. You introduce Glide's row ID at some stage. It's really important to do that because it means that any piece of information can suddenly have an automatically generated unique identifier, which comes in handy all over the place. So, and you'll see why when we introduce comments. So the next thing we're going to do is work out, okay, what does a task look like? What information might a to-do have? So we've got a name. We're going to also want a description. It's going to have a due date. So that's going to be a basic date and time column. Date, due. Okay, and you can format this quite in depth. So for the purposes of this, let's say it's just date only in medium format. And if it's in Glide tables, it will also respect any time zone. So wherever you are in the world, it will respect your time zone, which is really cool. Great. And then I think we want to have something that says, is this due today? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to introduce one of those if then else columns, and we're going to call it due today. And we're going to say if date due is on or is within today, then true. Otherwise, false. So what that's going to do is it's going to put a little tick when you use true and false in, doesn't have to be capitals, but I like to, in an if then else column. It creates a boolean, what you call a boolean or a check for you, which is really cool. And that way we can filter our list of tasks to only show the ones that are due today in this instance. So we're going to save that column. Another thing that we're going to want to introduce, I think, is a type of task. So let's say your typical household tasks, they're going to have types, right? So what we're going to do here is introduce a new column called type ID. And the reason we use an ID is because we want to have a list of types of task or to do that a user can select when they're adding one. So in order to set this up, what you do, and this is a common technique that you will use time and time again, I would imagine, when you're creating a Glide solution. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another new table, and this is going to be called to-dos / types. And this is going to have two columns. The first is going to be called the ID, which we'll put at the start. And the second one is going to be called the name. So let's add in a couple of examples. Cleaning. And the ID, you can use Glide's row ID, or in this case, you could simply create your own. The reason we use IDs in this case is because if you want to change the name of, let's say, a type, then if you're directly pulling through the name and you're relating it back to your to-dos, then the problem you're going to have is if you change this name, any relation on previous to-dos to this table is going to break. And I'll explain that in more detail in just a second. So we've got a cleaning type. Let's say we've also got gardening. And let's say we've also got kitchen, like that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be entering the ID of a type of to-do into our type ID column, and we're then going to be creating a relationship to pull through the type itself. And what this looks like is we're going to introduce a new column here called type relation. And this is going to be a computed column. It's going to be a relation, and it's going to relate to items where the value in the type ID matches the value in to-do's types ID, like that. And this is used all over the place in Glide, and it's an absolutely essential technique if you want to be able to build anything complex in terms of database and also the app as a whole. So to give you an example of this relation now working, let's introduce an example task. Let's say tidy my bedroom is the name of the task. Clean up the floor and make the bed, something like that. We'll leave the date due for now. So let's say the type ID is cleaning, and there we go. So it's identified that type of to-do back in the to-do types table through the ID, and it's pulled it through. So we can click on that and see exactly what row we're pulling through there. So what we can now do is create a lookup. And the way this typically works is you would create a relationship and then a lookup. And what the lookup does is it goes through your relationship into the row that you're pulling through in that relation, and it allows you to take any information from that row and dump it into this column. So we're going to call this type name, and in fact we'll call it a name lookup so that it's clear. And this is going to be a lookup column on the type relation, and we're going to come and get the name. So there we go. We're linking the IDs through a relation, and we're then going to look up the name of the related item. And that is the framework and the foundation of how Glide works. And the concept is called relational databases. So there's lots more detail you can go into here, but that's the basic principle. So we have a nice looking database of to-dos here now. And I think one other thing that we would like to probably add to this is who is assigned to a given to-do, so that a member of the family can open this app up and see exactly what they have to do. So we're going to go over here and add a new column called assigned/email. Notice that I'm using the slash in my column naming in quite a lot of places because it, as I say, it just gives real clarity on what's what. So this is going to be a basic email column, and it's going to be the email address of the user who is assigned. And then again, we're going to have an assigned relation. So it's the exact same concept as before, except this time our relation is looking at where the assigned email matches the value in user's email. So I think from memory, yeah, oscar@test.co.uk. So if I put that in here, like so, there we go. So it's found me through the relation, and now we can create a lookup for, let's say, the nickname, assigned nickname. And that is going to be a lookup on the assigned relation pulling through the nickname, Dad. So here we can see we've got tidy my bedroom. It's a cleaning to do, and it's assigned to me. So that's pretty much, I think, everything we will need in order to create our to-do list on a basic level. So the next thing to do is, and in fact what we could do is have a column here called is mine, and this is going to be an if then else column, and it's going to say if the assigned email is the signed in user, then true, otherwise false. So when you're trying to display information in your app, you can filter your lists of things within the app using visibility, or you can do some of that logic in the database itself, and I recommend the latter option where possible. So what we're saying here is basically put a check or a tick in any row where I am assigned to this to do, or whoever is signed in is the person responsible for this to do. And that will allow us to create our today view for me very quickly. So we'll show you that in a second. Okay, so we have our database of tasks. So now let's actually build an interface that lets us add and view these tasks.